Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. This week we're talking about items and material things used for our practice, buying mass-produced things versus maybe handmade or previously owned things. We're also talking about witch kits and budgeting tips. So I will not be able to read the entire actual topics to you. I have it up on the split screen on my phone, and as I figured out a previous time that I tried to do this, I cannot scroll while recording. As soon as I try to scroll to read more, it will stop recording the video. So I'm not going to read it to you word for word, but they will be in the description of this video as always, so you can read the full thing yourself. But we have 3 different topics from 3 different people. The first person asked us to talk about mass-produced items versus using things maybe that are naturally occurring or handmade, or maybe repurposing items that we already have or getting things secondhand, things like that. And also man-made versus naturally occurring items, which we've sort of talked about before, but they had a specific question about like crystals in particular. The second person asked us to talk about the Sephora Witch Kits that were a topic last calendar year. So this is evidence of the fact that we have a lot of topics all the time, and so as we put them in order, by the time we get a new one, it might not be able to actually have its turn in the lineup for a very long time. However, the Sephora Witch Kits thing kind of happened very quickly. They had announced that they were going to be sold, and then very soon afterwards they were recalled. Basically, they decided they were not going to sell them after all. They had just been announced. They never even made it out there. So it was a very quick turnaround on this topic, so it's a while later, but we'll be talking about that this week. And then the third question is just simply budgeting ideas and tips for spellcraft items, be it herbs or tools or just in general. What are our tips for spellcraft type things on a budget? So I actually also, please forgive me if my energy is all over the place in this video. I actually am not feeling well at all, but this is a series of topics that I really wanted to speak to, but I am feeling kind of weak. I'm still dealing with the insomnia that I've had ever since I moved house at the end of last year. So my sleep schedule is really messed up, my energy is fluctuating all over the place, and I also just have kind of a tummy ache today. So without further ado, the first topic, asking about mass-produced or things that are not naturally occurring, and specifically they had said, for example, some items that used to be made by hand are now available off the shelf. And what are our feelings and thoughts about that? Essentially, I do agree with the idea that it is strange how things have changed, that like they said back in the day, people would repurpose family heirlooms for magical tools, or you would hand make them, or maybe you would even buy them from an artisan who handmade them. And of course, if we think, one of the examples they used was a cauldron, that you could either repurpose a family heirloom, maybe you already have a cast iron pot that could be used as a cauldron, or pick one up from an antique store. Of course, as someone who loves Renaissance and medieval fairs, I also think back in the day, not just the 40s and 50s when the sort of new wave of modern paganism, neo-paganism, was sort of coming around, but way back in the day. Of course, those things were handmade, and you would be purchasing one directly from, for example, a blacksmith, or through a supplier who would be acquiring them from a blacksmith. And so if you do attend things like Renaissance or medieval fairs, such as I do, or go to any other types of reenactments, there are, people today still are blacksmiths, but there are also specifically people who work as blacksmiths for events like that, who you can actually go to and buy things or have things custom made for you if that's something that you're really into. I have friends who blacksmith. I have not commissioned them for anything yet, but I could if I wanted to. So that's an area where I feel like if that's something that you really do want and are interested in, those opportunities are still available. And I think the main thing that's good about things being like mass produced and available off the shelf, of course, is that they're more readily available and they might be much less expensive. So I know that people tend to really like the things that are available off the shelf due to the convenience and perhaps even the budgeting help. Now, for me personally, I definitely like a bargain, but I also do like to repurpose old items. And my cauldron specifically that I have a small one. I did get it at an antique store, and it was not incredibly expensive because it was, well, actually, I should actually correct that. It wasn't an antique store. She sold some antiques, but it was actually billed as a secondhand store. Secondhand stores tend to be less expensive than things that are specifically marketed as antique stores. So that's one tip for you. You can find some antique items at secondhand stores and things like that, and they might be less expensive. I think my cauldron, again, it's a mini cauldron. I didn't get a large one, but my mini cauldron, I believe, cost about $15 US, and someone actually got it for me as a gift. I also obtained the little hand bell that I use as an altar bell at an antique store for $2 or $3 US. So I'm always on the lookout for those bargains. I definitely recommend that if you get a chance to go to any place like that. I don't know if those things are available near you. Where I grew up, those things are kind of everywhere. So my mom and I definitely did a lot of that, and also garage sales. So I'm kind of mixing in my budgeting tips as well for the third topic, because these are things I definitely recommend checking out. Secondhand stores, garage sales, yard sales, etc., and also thrift stores. So I do have some items that I use that were purchased secondhand at thrift stores, antique stores, etc. I also have things that are repurposed that used to belong to members of my family, or just things that I already had around the house. So that is my personal preference. I do not have a lot of things that were just bought off the shelf, mass produced, partly because of budgetary ideology, basically. I prefer to not spend a whole lot of money on things like that, typically because I don't have a whole lot of disposable income to spend on these types of things. So out of necessity, I became a very thrifty person, but it's also just something that I think as a result of that, I love. And I also know other people who kind of grew up not being exposed to the world of thrifting or garage sailing or secondhand stores and things like that, who maybe even were raised with the idea that those things are less than desirable and only brand new, shiny, expensive things are worthwhile. I know people who are like that and were raised that way, and as a result, they don't think of those other options because it's just not how the world kind of works to them. But I am definitely a fan of thrifting and secondhand stores and all that kind of stuff. But also just the topic in general of like using mass-produced things versus using naturally occurring or repurposed things, it's really up to you. I don't believe that inherently certain ones have more or less power or anything like that. I do think that it's great if we can be mindful of where the things that we're purchasing came from, because if it is a mass-produced kind of thing, it might have been produced in a way that is not quite ethical, or, you know, with unfairly paid workers, things like that. So if you can be mindful of those things, I think that also tends to lead you toward supporting specific companies whose practices you really admire and want to support. Generally speaking, I think that thrifting, other secondhand types of things is great. That's just my personal preference as well. And then we're always, no matter what it is, we're cleansing and empowering items ourselves, typically. So any sort of energy, like I know some people don't like to use secondhand or repurposed things because maybe they've been told that, you know, you should be afraid of what kind of energy it might have, and that you don't want to use something secondhand because someone else's energy could mess up your magic. But if you are cleansing it and clearing it of any of that influence, it's basically becoming a blank slate, which you then imbue your own energy into and empower with your own energy and intention. So personally, that is not a fear of mine. A whole lot of my stuff is secondhand or thrifted or passed down to me from someone else. And I have personally never had a problem with any energies or anything like that, because if it feels like there is something not great about it or that I don't want about it, I cleanse it and I empower it with what I want. And that's how we do. So there's that. The topic of like man-made versus naturally occurring crystals is an interesting one. I had forgotten that opalite is the name of a man-made crystal. It is opalescent glass, essentially. And I have been known to go into like a crystal and gem store and be really annoyed when I see like multiple bins full of things that are just advertised as like a certain type of man-made thing that I know is just glass. And they'll be like, and here's the blue version and the pink version and the green version and the yellow version. And there's like the little cards that tell you what they mean. And people get so excited, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know all these varieties existed. And I'm just sitting there going, it's colored glass. You know, like, that doesn't mean that you can't use it for the color, like color magic. Because a lot of the time, if I have a crystal or a stone or something that I don't really know what it is, I go by the color for what the energy can be used for. But yeah, so things like obsidian, which is volcanic glass, and I see places selling like blue obsidian and pink obsidian, and it's like very light colored, and I'm sitting there like, is that really volcanic glass that's just been changed into this color? Like, how? Because obsidian is typically dark because it's volcanic, so I haven't done any like in-depth research into that as to whether it actually is the volcanic glass that they are somehow clarifying and dyeing a color so that it's like a very pure, forgive the expression, crystal clear, just slightly tinted a color. But I'm like, that seems to me like it's just glass that's been tumbled and like made a specific color, and they're calling it obsidian because obsidian is volcanic glass. So to me that seems just like marketing ploys, but I don't know, I haven't actually looked into that. But those are the kind of things that like I don't buy those, because I'm like, it's glass, it's pink glass. And if I can find a piece of blue or green sea glass, for example, on the beach, then I'm going to use that before I buy a polished piece of dyed glass for $5 or whatever. You know, just to me, there are definitely things that are like, people are just out to make money off of us. And the more we know about what we want to obtain and what it's about for us, the better off our pocketbooks will be, I think. But that said, I do have a couple man-made stones. Gold stone, for example, I have one or two that were given to me. If you've heard me talk about my crystal collection before on my personal channel or even on here in previous videos, you know that most of my crystal collection was given to me as gifts. When people know that you're a witch and they know that you like crystals, it's one of the easiest gifts to give, you know? So like I have some like sitting behind me even, and ones that were passed down to me from my mom, things like that. So I have a couple goldstone pieces that were given to me. I did buy myself a blue goldstone when I was in Lilydale. The bargain shop at Lilydale, such good prices. Talk about a bargain. They are not, you know, that is not false advertising. It's called the bargain shop. It's actually a bargain. So I got some crystals from there for like 50 cents or 99 cents a piece. So one of the things I grabbed was blue goldstone, because at the time I didn't know that they made it in multiple colors. You know, I just thought like it's goldstone, so it's gold. It looks like it has flecks of gold in a like brownish stone. But there's blue goldstone, and it looked really cool. And apparently there's also red and green and all kinds of colors that they can make it, because it's man-made, so they can kind of do whatever they want with it. But I really liked the blue one, and so yeah, I think that there definitely is merit, like this person who asked this question, said that they were really drawn to opalite. And I think that there is merit in being drawn to something, whether it's man-made or not, or, you know, whether you're looking for an athame or a wand and you find one that might be mass produced, maybe it's from a larger supply store or whatever, but it really calls to you and something about the design just feels like it's for you. I think that there is merit to that. And so don't let me tell you that you can't do that. I'm not telling you you can't do that. It's all personal preference when it comes down to that. Yeah, so I do have some crystals that were man-made, but I don't tend to buy them for myself. I'm certainly not seeking out more of them. I personally do tend to have better luck actually working with natural crystals and things like that. And I have had great luck working with repurposed or secondhand or thrifted, etc., tools and other items. So I know some people might be afraid about that. My personal experience has been great with those types of things. So the budgeting tips question, I guess I'll just go on to that one since I've kind of already been talking about it. My basic tips for that overall, as for like, you know, where could you find some of these things? If you're looking for herbs, I definitely recommend, my first thing that I would do is go to one of my local garden shops. That would actually be the first thing I would do, because they're local business and there are some in my area that I really know and trust. I like the quality of their plants, things like that. And I know that they also don't tend to be super expensive. So that would probably be the first place I would go. If I was looking for dried herbs and not like growing my own or getting my own plants and then drying it myself, if I was looking for something that was already dried, I would go to one of my local witchy shops that also sells herbs in bulk. And then I would buy in bulk. If you can, they usually have lower prices if you buy more. Look out for whenever they're doing a sale. They might have a specific day, specific weekend, something like that, where they might be doing a discount on herbs. So I would definitely look for things like that at your local shops. Again, support local business if you can, if you are able, if there are things in your area. Otherwise, as far as like general budgeting tips go, I saw actually somebody shared something on Instagram from someone else a little while ago that this person had put together like actually helpful tips, like actually helpful practical tips. And one of the things they said was reuse something that you already have before you buy something, check the thrift store before you buy something new, etc. So I really liked that. I like that people are talking about that. That is something that I also, obviously, as I've already said in this video, something that I am a fan of. So I would say start with things you already have in your house. If there's something you want, what do you already have in your possession, somewhere in your house that you can use that will work for the purpose you are looking for? And it might not seem super obvious, because if you're like, well, I need a crystal and I don't have any crystals, then you might have to go a step further and think about like, okay, well, what do I want the crystal for? And maybe see if there's something else you own that can fulfill that same purpose and be used for the same intention that is maybe not necessarily a crystal. You know, can you use a river stone or some other type of rock from outside your house or in your driveway? If you have a gravel driveway, a lot of the time they have pieces of quartz in them. That's how I got a lot of my white quartz pieces as a child, was from my grandma's driveway. And things like that. Or is it something that you're looking for them because of the symbolism of earth? In which case, what else could you use? Could you use a plant? Could you go outside to connect with the energy of earth? Things like that. So thinking about the intention and the purpose of the thing that you want to get, and seeing if there's something else you already have that can work just as well for that purpose. That would be the obviously least expensive, and you would be repurposing something that you already have, so that's awesome. The next step after repurposing something you already have, I think, would be, like, for me, asking family members or friends if they have something that I specifically want or need that they are done with, that they don't want anymore. So something that they might be looking to get rid of, something they might have in a bin to eventually do for a garage sale or whatever. Just, if you know anyone like that, maybe call them up and say, hey, I know you do garage sales every now and again. Do you happen to have, an old wooden spoon maybe that you would let me use? And then you could use that for your kitchen witchery or something like that. And if it came from someone who you have positive feelings and connection with, I think that's so much the better. I don't know, I like things with a bit of history. I like old things, and I have a lot of things that were my mom's or my grandma's or my mom's friends, things like that. So to me, that's just an extra layer of meaning. To you, it may not mean anything at all. So it's just a suggestion, but that would be the next thing I would do after repurposing something. And then after asking someone else if they have it, I would look out for garage sales, thrift stores, secondhand stores, things like that, where you can get an item that is not brand new from the mass production line or whatever, and that is also going to be a little less expensive. And then my next tip would be going to a local business and artisan that you really love their work and support, because I definitely think that it's important to support people who are sharing their art with the world, sharing their work with the world in that way. I think it's important to support those people when we can. It is a little bit more expensive, so if you're going from the budget point of view, it may not always seem as budget friendly to get something from a local artist that you really like, but maybe that's something you save up for, a very special item that you want to get from someone to support them and that will have a lot of meaning for you. So it might not be something that budget-wise you can just get everything from this artist that you really like, because that can add up quickly. So that's why I recommend secondhand and thrifting and stuff like that as the step before supporting local, just because it is a little bit more expensive. And with local shops and things like that, the things that they are getting, if they are not handmade by the people who own the shop, they are typically selling mass-produced items that they are getting from a supply of some kind of supply store. So there is that aspect as well. And then if you can't find something from a local store or anything like that, that's where you would go get it off the shelf from wherever. Or perhaps before that is shop around online and see if, but I kind of included that in supporting artists, because a lot of the time we support them by ordering things online if they have a website or anything like that. And then maybe go to a store and pick one up. So yeah, that's the order of those tips for me. So thanks for sticking with me. The last thing is the Sephora Witch Kits thing. If you didn't hear about that, it was sometime last year that there was a company that put together what they were calling a witch kit. I don't remember if it was actually called a quote unquote beginner witch kit, or if it was just called a witch kit and we all kind of colloquially called it a beginner witch kit. I don't remember. But it was going to be sold at Sephora stores. But it was not created by Sephora. It was created by a perfume company, and it was going to be sold in Sephora. And it consisted of a tarot deck, a white sage bundle, a crystal, I believe it was a rose quartz, and 8 or 9 samples of this perfume company's different perfumes. And that was the kit. And it was very quickly decided that they were not going to sell these after all, because there was a lot of backlash from a lot of different communities for various reasons. So there was, firstly, the cultural appropriation issue with the inclusion of the white sage bundle. White sage, also known as sagebrush or big sagebrush, is native to the American Southwest and is specifically used in indigenous spiritual practice. Indigenous peoples and Native American and other First Nations people have been asking the rest of us to stop using their sacred plants for decades, but we're all kind of getting the message at different times. So I first heard about this really being a big issue within the past 5 years myself, and as I read more books that are by different authors, I'm reading everything that Starhawk has published this year. I'm reading a lot of Starhawk, and so I'm reading some things that were published in the late 80s or in the 90s where this was already a big topic of concern that the community knew about. But because I wasn't connected to those aspects of the community. I didn't know about it when I was first starting, you know, in the sort of early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s, even though this had already been a topic of concern for like 2 decades at that point. I really feel like at this point, it's been around for a long time, it's been a concern, and a lot of people are still unaware of it. So I think we just can keep getting that word out there and letting people know that that's been a topic of concern for decades, and we're taking forever to catch up and actually like go along with that request that we stop using sacred plants that don't belong to our culture, that are not specific to our religious path. But there's also like, there's just a lot of other aspects to it that I'm not going to talk about all in this video because it's a whole separate thing on its own. But basically, that was a big reason that there was a lot of backlash from Native American and other First Nations and indigenous communities, because it specifically included a white sage bundle. And that has kind of become like a very stereotypical symbol of like white new age witches, that like everybody thinks you have to use them and that they are the most powerful thing ever. And I think we think that because they are so sacred to indigenous practice, and we have not been taught what is equally sacred and magical from our own cultures and backgrounds. And so we go to what we know is super sacred and special about other cultures. And in the process, our intention may be good, but our impact is not so great. And so that was a big issue. In general, for me, it was just kind of like a weird thing to hear that a witch kit was going to be sold at Sephora, which I mainly know of as a makeup place. And like, the prices seem high to me, and certain people have said things like, oh, I went to Sephora today to get one thing and ended up spending $300. Oops. You know, and so I'm like, what? Like, that's just so foreign to me. And so to me, it was the combination of the financial accessibility aspect of it, of like making it seem like you have to buy things in order to be a witch, first of all, but also the fact that it was at like a makeup store. And so even if it was a less expensive one, the fact that it was at a makeup store and that the company who had created the kit is a perfume company, it really said to me that this whole kind of trend that's been going on for the past few years of witchcraft being really popular again in fashion and in aesthetics, it really said to me that people are treating witchcraft like a fashion statement. Because why else would you be selling a religious starter kit basically at a makeup store if it wasn't something that you viewed as an aesthetic choice, you know? So to me, it was a compounding of the way that we were seeing witchcraft being treated as fashion. So there was that aspect for me, and there was also like, there were some issues where some people were saying that the company had not obtained the rights to use the artwork of the tarot deck that they were including, that it was made by someone else, and people accused them of stealing it. And the company that created the kit actually did come out and say that that was false, that they had obtained the rights to reproduce that artwork. They had purchased the rights from that artist. So that, as far as I know, was not a valid criticism. But I think that the other aspects already were like crazy enough for the rest of us. So there was a lot of people saying things like, you know, would you sell a designer rosary and a little vial of holy water and, you know, a copy of the Bible as a beginner Catholic kit? Or would you sell a menorah and a dreidel as a beginner Judaism kit? So, you know, it was this kind of idea that like a religious path was being packaged and sold along with perfume at a makeup store, and that it was kind of diminishing the fact that this is a religion and a spiritual path. It's not just something that you dress up as. But yeah, you know, just that kind of, it seemed very disrespectful. It also seemed a lot like the people who created the kit in the first place didn't really know anything about paganism or witchcraft. They didn't seem to be members of the community from what a lot of us were like looking up on their website and things like that. they just seem to be people who run a perfume company, and they seem pretty cool, and maybe you like their perfume. I don't know, I've never tried it or anything like that, but I wasn't seeing anything on their website about paganism or about witchcraft to imply that they actually practice it or are any part of the community themselves. And so that was just kind of another slap in the face, that it was like our religion as well as indigenous spirituality were being smushed together, as they often are, and packaged and sold at Sephora. And it was just kind of like, what's happening to us? What's happening to the community? And, you know, and because it wasn't necessarily people from the community who were even doing it, it was like, not only are people trying to make money off of selling our religion to people, but it's not even people in the community. You know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of specifics about it probably that we did never find out, but the company that created it did decide right away, after hearing all the complaints from everybody, they decided right away, okay, this is not gonna happen. And some people were also really upset about that and thought that it should have been allowed to happen, because a lot of people think that it's really good that witchcraft becomes mainstream and more accessible, so that more people are finding out about it, because anything that helps people learn about it, if it helps them find their true path, you know, maybe they were meant to find this path, and if a kit on the shelf at Sephora is the way that's going to reach them, we should embrace that kind of thing. And I agree with the intent behind that people find their way to their path many different ways, and we shouldn't judge how they got into it. But I'm not so sure I agree with the way that this was done and calling it accessible, because it seemed to be very specifically marketed to certain people, very much playing on stereotypes, very much focusing on the aesthetic, you know, and just the idea that anyone needs to buy anything, let alone certain items, in order to become a witch, was kind of like, it's giving people the wrong impression from the get-go, that, you know, if they think they have to buy a tarot deck and a crystal and some perfume in order to become a witch, then maybe they're starting off with the wrong idea of what being a witch is. And the hope, of course, is that even if that got them interested in it, and then they learned more and found out that that's not what it's about, and they're able to learn more for themselves and really embrace it for what it is, that it should be a good thing that they found it through that, even if the thing they found it through is not great. I don't know if I fully agree with that. I think that we can do better. I think that the community made it very much known how we felt. Indigenous community made it very clear how they felt about it. And yeah, I think that it was a good thing that they decided not to sell it. I think that there was a lot that was not all the way thought through about it, and it's not something that I would have recommended to people, certainly. So yeah, that's my video this week. I need to go lay down. I really am not feeling well. This was a mess. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you next week. Until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.